William Carter was the man at the top of $1 million logistics empire. He ran the world from his luxurious office and measured success in numbers, but he felt like something was missing. One day he took off his tie, put on an old work uniform and, concealing his identity, started at the bottom in his own company's warehouse. The days spent in the midst of heavy boxes, sweat, and noise would show him an unexpected truth. A worker eating food from the trash would make William question both his company and himself. This wasn't just the start of one worker's story, but the beginning of a CEO's transformation. Thanks for watching the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, your support means a lot to us. William Carter was a man who grew up in a life of luxury and climbed to the top of his career. As the CEO of one of the largest logistics companies in the country, sitting in his spacious corner office, getting lost in reports, or sipping coffee with investors in his stylish suits, just didn't satisfy him anymore. His company's success was measured in numbers, sure, but he was curious about the real stories behind those numbers, the sweat and effort that went into them. On paper, everything seemed flawless, but deep down William felt like something was missing. So, he made a radical decision. He would hide his identity and start from the bottom in his own company. The next morning he stood in front of the mirror, looking at clothes he hadn't worn in years. A faded work suit, worn-out boots, and a cheap hat. He didn't shave his beard and he ruffled his hair a little. His reflection in the mirror was almost unrecognizable. When he arrived at the warehouse, no one suspected him. He was introduced as the new guy, and immediately got to work. On his first day, carrying heavy boxes was tough for a man whose hands hadn't built up calluses. His shoulders hurt, his back ached, but he didn't complain. He packed orders, organized shelves, and sweated among the noise of forklifts. He had stepped into the worker's world, and it was so different from his conference rooms. Days passed. William eavesdropped on the conversations between the workers, laughed at their jokes, and watched the exhausted expressions on their faces. But one night everything changed. During the break, while the other workers ate their meals and gossiped by the coffee machine, William noticed something in the shadows. In a dim corner of the warehouse, a young man stood wearing old and worn-out work clothes. His name was Daniel. William read it from a small, dirty name tag on the child's jumpsuit. Daniel quickly glanced around nervously. After making sure no one was paying attention to him, he bent down next to the trash can. There, lying discarded, was a half-eaten, crushed sandwich. Daniel's trembling hands grabbed the sandwich. He hesitated for a moment, as if struggling with his pride. Then, giving in to the pressure of hunger, he began eating it in small bites. William froze. The man who stood at the head of a multimillion-dollar company was watching an employee eat food from the trash in his own warehouse. This scene would make him question all his assumptions and the entire success story. Something inside William broke. Daniel's desperation wasn't just the story of one worker. It was a truth his company couldn't see, a reality not reflected in the reports. That night, instead of thinking like a CEO, he began to think like a human. Instead of observing more, it was time to take action. But how? The answer to this question would mark the beginning of a journey that would change both his life and his company forever. William would never be able to forget Daniel's trembling hands and the sandwich he took from the trash. A storm was brewing inside him, anger, shame, and deep guilt mixed together. One of his own employees, under the roof of the massive company he ran, was eating food from the trash due to hunger. This truth shattered the perception of success William had built over the years. In that moment, he realized there was a world beyond the reports he signed, the flashy presentations, and the profit margins. He took a deep breath, trying to suppress the tightness in his chest, and walked over to Daniel. His steps were heavy, as if each one added more weight to his shoulders. "Hey brother, are you okay?" he asked, making sure his voice was soft and calm. Daniel flinched at once. He nearly dropped the sandwich and stepped back, fear in his eyes. I'm sorry, please don't tell anyone," he whispered, his voice trembling and fragile. His head hung low, shrinking as if he wanted to disappear. Without thinking, William knelt down. He wanted to look at Daniel eye to eye, to see him as an equal. "Why did you have to eat from the trash?" he asked, his voice neither judgmental nor superior, but with the sincerity of a man who just wanted to understand. Daniel stayed silent for a moment, then swallowed hard and looked up. His eyes were wet, but he had no choice but to tell his story. "I work full-time here, but my salary doesn't even cover my rent. My mom is sick and her treatment is really expensive. I have to take care of my siblings too. I send my food money to them. I can't buy anything for myself." His words trailed off, his voice caught in his throat. These words pierced William's heart like a knife. He knew how his company operated, cutting costs, increasing efficiency, maximizing profit, But he had never seen so clearly that behind those cold numbers, there were stories like Daniel's. He had always admired his employees' hard work, but he hadn't realized that sometimes that hard work was fueled by hunger and desperation. He stood up, a decision forming in his mind. This wasn't just Daniel's issue, it was a reflection of the company culture, of the entire system. The next morning William walked to the center of the warehouse. He still wore the old work suit, but this time he had nothing to hide. "I'm William Carter," he said loudly, "the CEO of your company." A hum rose from the crowd, confused glances, whispers, even a few laughs. No one could believe it. The most shocked of all was Daniel. He had just learned that the man who had caught him eating from the trash the night before was his boss. His face turned red and he looked down at the ground. William locked eyes with Daniel and continued, "Last night I saw something here. I saw one of my employee eating food from the trash. And that's my fault." His voice was firm, but there was also a trace of regret. "From today on we're increasing the salaries of the warehouse workers. And we'll provide each of you with free meals every day. No one, especially not anyone in this company, should go hungry." The crowd was silent for a moment, then suddenly burst into applause and cheers. Some wiped their eyes, others hugged each other. Daniel, still in shock, felt tears running down his face, dripping onto the chest of his dirty jumpsuit. William walked over to him, put a hand on his shoulder, and whispered in a voice that could barely be heard over the noise of the crowd, "No one should eat from the trash." Then unexpectedly he hugged Daniel. This wasn't a CEO hugging an employee, it was a human reaching out a hand of friendship to another human. That day not only Daniel's life, but William's life changed. As he walked out of the warehouse, the weight on his shoulders seemed lighter. He was determined to rebuild his company, but this time it would be about people, not profit. When William returned to his desk, the reports were still the same, but the man reading them was not. He had started thinking not as a CEO but as a human. And that might just be his greatest success. Thanks for watching the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, your support means a lot to us.